Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of True ML Talks. I am Nikunj Bajaj, co founder and CEO at True Foundry. And today with me here we have Adhithya Ravichandran, who is a senior software engineer at Loblaw Digital. Aditya, it would be really nice if you can introduce yourself for our listeners.
Hey, thanks, Nikunj. Thanks for having me here. Yes, like you just said, my name is Adhithya Ravichandran. I also go by Adi or Adi, to whomever cannot pronounce my name. I'm happy to be called Adi. Yes, I'm a senior software engineer at Loblaw Digital. I'm part of the machine learning platform team where we build build and maintain the machine learning platform. Basically, this includes a bunch of infrastructure, highly available databases, code templates, the serving infrastructure, training and monitoring and observability, and so on and so forth.
Nice. Aditya, this is, and maybe I can even call you Adi just
Yeah,
because you're okay with it. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so, so Adi, basically, this platform team in general is very interesting to me, and I would love to talk more in detail about your work within the platform team as well. But before we get there, I would love to understand what got you here, like what got you interested in the field of machine learning, in the field of ML platform, like walk us through your journey a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I kind of find it hard to relate to a lot of people's careers. I mean, some people might say it's pretty typical, so who knows? We're all finding our own way through this industry. Um, I'd say, I mean, I did my undergrad in India. I was in, studying in Chennai. It's called Madras Institute of Technology. It's part of Anna University. And I did electronics and communication. The one we call ECE back home in India, not electrical and computer engineering. Um, my undergrad project capstone was speech recognition. I suppose that's my looking back at it. I mean, I didn't really think of it as, oh, I'm gonna get into this huge AI field. It was like late 2008, 2009. We hadn't, neural networks existed, but they weren't a thing that's so hot. Yeah, and we were doing speech recognition for Tamil, and we were doing hidden Markov models, and then if you can place yourself in that time, it was not a great economic condition. So I had to find a place that would pay me to do a master's. And although I got into a bunch of universities, I luckily landed at a place here in Canada called the McMaster University. And there I didn't continue doing speech recognition, although the lab that I ended up being part of did do it in the past, and there were some PhD students who were doing it towards the end of it. But I ended up doing something completely different in the field of smart grids, microgrids. I built a simulation platform as part of my master's, and then switched supervisors and did a PhD. Also in smart grids, but in energy management. Yeah, like using optimal control algorithms for optimal operation of microgrids with EVs and batteries and solar generation and things like that. It feels a long way ago, but yeah. So there, some people still would classify this under AI machine learning. I was using a lot of optimization algorithms and optimization solvers, things you folks might associate with OR or operations research. yeah, so I basically took a bunch of problems, and we didn't have enough. Um, we didn't have a microgrid per se on campus. We tried to, at least until I left. But we did a lot of simulations. My simulations background helped, and simulations plus optimization. Um, that was my research. Um, yeah, and moving forward, I graduated out of my PhD in 2016, and in Canada, there's not a lot of industries that are directly relevant, and even in the US at the time, there weren't a lot of industries which were doing it. Maybe they were, and I just didn't have the connections. So I ended up in one of the big industries that is dominant in Toronto, which is the financial sector. So I worked in two big banks, first in a purely analytics type of role in anti-money laundering. So, that was my first exposure to huge data sets and large warehouses and analytics on that scale. And then I went to another bank in Canada. Both of them were the big five banks, one of the big five banks each. And I was in there, at that time, it was still common for teams to use center of excellence teams, and I was in one of them. Shortly, I worked with extremely smart people. Worked, like under a boss who's worked with Hinton and so on and so forth. So it's great exposure. I mean, it's living and working in Toronto is it comes with some benefits, especially in this field, I can say. And then I wanted to see banks are slow and banks don't move fast in putting new technology out there. So I wanted to experience something of that sort, and I went into fintech. And it was in two fintech companies. One became huge, and I left when it was still huge. Fintech took a hit. If you don't know about this, fintech took a hit in the last couple of years. Yeah, I learned a ton. I was so in the bank roles, I was exposed to risk modeling and fraud detection, so imbalanced data sets and so on. Working with constrained resources, so it's like physical workstations, and I had to, run large models, like not large models on large data sets, like boosted trees, hosted. The data is hosted in the same machine, the models tuning in the same machine, and obviously, resource constraints. It wasn't a great time to do that, but I gained so many skills being doing that. So I'm grateful for that looking back. And then in the first fintech job, I was part of a team with a lot of smart people trying to get models out into production very fast. Small but mighty data set, I would say. So I was exposed to time series forecasting and backtesting, and then working with Kubernetes batch jobs running on, and I tried to set up Kubeflow, and then I was also an admin for the data warehouse. And then the whole team was, working in a startup, especially that one. It was very sales and marketing heavy, so it was very like an exposure to a whole new game for me, and kind of gaining insights into how modeling is not just about the product or the data science metrics, but also how it relates to revenue and human acceptability of results. Not necessarily accurate. Like people want to be happy looking at the model results. So those are things that I learned there. And then I went into a small startup as the only first hire to set up everything related to data. So I worked with back-end engineering teams. Think about an back-end engineering team in a startup that's trying to iterate fast on features, not necessarily doing the best in terms of not necessarily having the time to do proper, like, data practices, but at the same time building amazing products for the customer. But in the end, if you're a fintech and if you want to bet your money, like your company's future on your and revenues on the data that you collect over time, you kind of have to start worrying about data early on. So building up processes with that team, also setting up my own services that would do like preliminary fraud detection and stuff like that. Building the first risk models for our financial products, setting up our warehouses, selecting vendors, self-hosting some BI stacks. So that was my experience. And then I wanted to. So one of my goals as a person in this industry is to be adept at end to end all this stack technically. So I mean, I was kind of clear with that in my mind. So a lot of my friends are in high positions right now, and they're doing really well, and I'm very happy for them. But this is the choice that I made, and one of the things that I wanted to do was ML ops, and that's where my current role comes in. And that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's the path.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aditya, for walking me through your career journey and kind of explaining, and it's fascinating to see, how you have really put on like different hats, all the way from building like the basic machine learning models to doing research and building systems and now doing ML ops and all. So it's very very good to know this. Now, one of the other interesting things is Loblaw Digital. Like it's very very interesting to see how machine learning itself plays a crucial role for the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so much so that you all have built a team that's kind of working towards platformizing what's happening with machine learning within the company, right? So maybe you can give some context on what are the most important, most interesting type of ML problems that you all are trying to solve, and how it has created like some huge impact or huge wins for the end customer basically.
Right. So, I mean, maybe a little bit of background could help. Um, I joined the company a year ago, and the company has been in existence for 10 years. We are part of Canada's largest retailer, basically. There's multiple brands across the country, instantly recognizable by pretty much every Canadian. So we are the digital side of that company, and that's how we were created. And what that means is that we are everything, like all the online ordering, e-commerce, and then we also have delivery and order pickup for a lot of our pretty much actually all of our grocery brands. So yeah, so we have to build that out and own it. And yes, being part of a big company has some perks, and you can operate it as a startup, but you also have a big client which has a huge backing and huge expertise in this industry, who's there. But at the same time, we need to be able to do things in an efficient way, in a more optimized way in terms of like strategy overall, not optimized in terms of your model is optimized. So that's one of the reasons. Over time, I think my team is at least 5 years old, probably older if you look at the origin of the folks who started this team. But yeah, so I think that's the driver behind it. But we've also evolved over time, right? So there's we're like we're a company. Loblaw Digital is like a few hundreds, and half of us are engineers, are in the tech org, and we are the platform ML platform team is like less than 10 people. Like, yeah. So uh, so given the size and proportion to the company, we also end up being the team which uses some niche, well, in the company niche products. So something like an workflow orchestrator, like Airflow, is not necessarily used by any other team within Loblaw Digital. So we needed to have a core group of people who had expertise in specific tool sets, and that's the reason we have the team.
Got it. I see.
Yeah,
And for example, you gave a this is a good example around the workflow orchestrator, right? So you're saying that your team uses Airflow heavily, and as a platform team, would you end up exposing like some abstractions on top of Airflow for the rest of the company? Is that how the work arrangement is?
yeah, yeah. Good question. Yeah, and that's yeah. So it's okay. So it's not just the machine learning teams who use Airflow, right? And
Right.
of course, as um, folks might be aware that a lot of data engineering and BI and analytics teams
Sure.
use Airflow very heavily as well.
Right.
Um, we have a very good practice on that. We use mostly open source tools, and so Airflow being one of them. Um, so how we do this is that so we have experience over time, and we have this strategy in our team wherein we go from working on a project closely with a specific use case with a specific team who's responsible for that use case, let's say a machine learning team in this case, and we would figure out how to get something done, and then we would try to pick the best practices and then make code templates or um, Python packages or anything that are internal that could be repeated. That doesn't have to be done from scratch again. And over time, this is built up to be a core set of um, practices that are codified in code, basically, and then those serve as templates that are used by our teams.
Got it. I see. Okay, understood. So that workflow generally makes a ton of sense. And would you? So actually, before this call, I was reading a blog that you all had written around Helios recommendation engine as
Right.
well. And is the there's a bunch of problems that you talk about in the introduction of the blog. I don't know if you have if this was done prior to you joined the company. Like actually, what's the setup here?
Right. So it started prior to me
Yeah.
joining.
Yeah.
The whole idea,
Yeah.
concept, and so things like that. It's still being worked on. Like we have a working Helios recommendation engine, and of
Got it.
course we have to improve the features. The first release has always got bugs, and we have to like improve on them. It's working. It's working well, and we've been onboarding a lot more models and a lot more use cases
Got it. So
to
from
that. Yeah.
understood. So from what you have either faced yourself or heard from people, what was the major problem that you were trying to solve when you all decided to build Helios recommendation engine? Uh,
Right. So I think first of all, I am probably the only person who does not have their hands full with work related to Helios Recommendation
Oh,
Engine
wow.
in my team. Um, Partly because there's like 4 or 5 other use cases, and I work with pretty much all of the rest of them
Awesome.
to a degree. But I'm all part of my team's meetings and design discussions and demos and feedback discussions. I also sometimes, when it's needed, I work on some requests that comes from the team that's working on it. So I am fairly familiar with it. So based on that, I can tell you is that um, we are an e-commerce platform, right? So when somebody goes onto our website, a search results page or a product page, um, you it's kind of no brainer to have recommendations. And I'm sure it is actually mentioned in the blog as well that we were using a third party tool to begin with. Um, the other thing is that being Canada's largest retailer, we have the country's biggest loyalty program. So we have this huge amount of data, probably one of the best data sets you can get in Canada for Canadian customers. Um, so we have the ingredients to build our own models and serve them. And and paying for a third party provider wherein you have to plug in, it's not easy to plug in necessarily your models that you're able to train and have that be cost effective was one of the main drivers. And by the time we thought about this, we had also gained enough experience in being able to deploy um, our own models on our own. Like we have our practices, we have, like we use managed Kubernetes on. I think it's also not a secret that we are on GCP. So we use GCP's GKE Kubernetes, and we use. It was also mentioned in the blog that we use Selden, which is
Right.
our like we use. It's an open source tool as well. So we use Selden on GCP, and we have like that gives you the ingredients to build an API wrapper around your models. Uh,
Absolutely.
and voila, like we have our internal teams that I told you the rest of the engineers are building the ecom backends and front ends, and they have their blog posts too, and they're building amazing things, so
Got it.
they can call our APIs. So that's the
Got it.
gist of
So
it. It's a
essentially, you would
yeah.
say model serving is like the main problem that you felt like the Helios recommendation engine had to solve.
Um, it was it the rubber hits the road in model serving, as with
Right.
any company.
Yeah.
It's just that we have the data sets that we weren't able to fully use. And the models and the training, like we were using recommendations models, and we have our own internal. I'm not sure if that work is out yet, but it's like we have our own like huge models that can operate in vector spaces. So like it's basically some like we are missing out on things if we don't use our models we're able to train and wrap them in model APIs and serve them. It's not that they were like I think it was just not that easy to serve our own models with the third party. By the time I was here, we were phasing it out, so I never used the third party tool. Yeah.
Got it. Except for Selden.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Uh,
right?
well, Selden, it is third party. I mean, in the
Or
sense
you
that
mean you
it's
use the open source version of it only?
yes.
I see. I see. I see.
So
Got
we maintain the Selden operators. Yes.
Got it. I see. That makes sense. And in terms of with even when we talk about overall inferencing, there are a lot of different techniques in which people can be running inferencing, right? Like you could have like your real time serving where you have like absolute latency sensitive use case. User clicks on a certain product, you want to give them some recommendations, and then you could have like another different types of inferencing, including batch inferencing or async inferencing. So would you
Right.
say that most of your inferencing needs are real time, or like most would be like batch or async?
So I think we would say we have been mostly doing batch inferencing
Hmm.
and using low latency key value stores to serve. We do have low latency requirements, like very stringent requirements. Therefore, we do inferencing offline and frequently, and the historically we've been doing that a lot, but recently we are doing a few. We're starting to do a lot of online inferencing as well.
I see. Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah,
So primarily it is batch inferencing. You would pre-compute your inferences and save it in a basically a key value pair, a key value lookup store
yeah,
basically.
yeah.
Understood. I see. In So, like, by the way, I personally come from a recommendation system background as well. So, like, this space also is very interesting to me. So, like, one
Mhm.
of the things that a lot of times people tend to or want to achieve in recommendation, especially, or maybe even search, is personalization, right? So,
Right.
is there an element of personalization that's already in place, or that's something that you are working towards currently?
No, I think it's in. I would say firmly that it's in place. We've actually had yeah, like we've like starting with matrix multiplication. That's been around for a few years. We've gone on to like more sophisticated models. Um, yeah, like we we have like huge transformers and things
Got
like
it.
that. Yeah,
Understood. Understood. So, and these like one of the biggest issues that I personally faced back then when we were building recommendation systems was there was a lot of context that was happening in real time. Like you have to respond to this signal that is the prior click of the user essentially, right? And
right,
then there's a lot of context that extremely offline. For example, like I don't know, some seasonal patterns for the last 2 years about this particular product, right? So there you have these like extreme type of features essentially, right? And that posed a huge engineering challenge.
right.
So would you mind sharing how are you all tackling that issue as a platform team?
Yeah, it's
And
a
of
good
course,
question.
and just one thing, I would love to dive a little bit deep into, if possible, is like the platform team angle to it. So like you don't necessarily even have to talk about the exact solutions per se, but more
Right.
importantly, how are you empowering others as a platform team to be able to deal with this like I guess extreme use cases.
So there's another blog that just came out. We're trying to put these out. Just
Nice.
um, we're building out some a few things. So we want to build data contracts and have data as a service. So you want
Hmm.
to have services that serve in-time data as much as possible. So
Hmm.
that's we're starting to do that. And the other piece of this is that we were using a proprietary third-party vendor for our in-session in-browser actions before. Um, and I think in my talk that I gave recently in here in Toronto, TMLS, um, I did mention it. So I think I'll be safe in saying this. We have now implemented our like open source version of Snowplow Analytics. So we have a lot more control over the pipelines from someone's browser or app, uh, and having them be available faster
Got
to
it.
our backend services, including models. And I've seen, I've seen some traction on that already. Yeah.
Understood. Understood. Um,
Does that answer your question?
it does. Although I think I would love to understand a bit more, a little bit more in detail on this topic. Like basically, so I understand that, kind of almost centralizing the data service, if I may, which would solve some of the problems that I talked about. Um,
So the good thing about my team is that um, my uh, my team is under the data and machine learning platform org.
okay. Yeah.
So this org is responsible for the Snowplow analytics stack, BI and analytics reporting and data set creation type of stack, real-time data stack like streaming pipelines, batch pipelines, and data as a service, and things like that. Outside of the machine learning stuff that I told you about.
Got it. I see.
So yeah,
So it
so
has the advantage of having a lot of things centralized within the team itself in some way.
and we're trying to keep it that way. It's hard to I don't know how many large organizations or how many large organizations with this characteristic that you worked in. Large organizations, as they expand, tend to want to have specialties within business lines,
Right.
as there are more VPs and directors who want to make something fast. And luckily, we've with the vision coming from up top, we've been able to keep this together so far, and it seems like it's going to be that way for
Got it.
at least in the foreseeable future.
Got it. Understood. It's beautiful. It's very nice to be in that place, I guess, from as a platform team. One other thing, I want to switch gears a little bit. Like as you mentioned in the beginning, that your team actually handles pretty much all the parts of ML platform, from data to model to, I guess, the development environments in some way, and then all the way to observability, basically. And I think you talk a little bit about the ML observability stack in the blog as well, right? Would love to understand that here when we are talking about observability. Have you built all of these solutions? It would be great if you can explain. Have you built most of this in house, or
Right.
have you relied on some tools? You talked about the centralized logger service as well. We'd love to understand some of those details, because observability is a topic that most people are very interested in learning more about.
Yeah. Yeah. Good question. I would say just one thing, like with from data to the observability side of things. I think at this point, our org is mature enough that our machine learning engineers, our data scientists, are able to build the data pipelines for their models themselves.
Okay.
Uh, uh, yeah, like with the templates and the experience we have in our teams over time, I think that's beautiful. You use the word beautiful. I think that, to me, as someone who's had these varied experiences, is beautiful because uh, we've got. It's not just the skills that is important, and I think a lot of people do have the skills. It's just that having that be available and having the data be discoverable and having the organization policy such that they can go and find data themselves is not hard to get to. I think outside of the technical stuff, I think that's strategy and organization wise. I think that's something that is good, and it's not perfect. There's areas where we can improve, but I think we're in a good place on that. Having said that, going to observability, uh, yes. So we have spoken to vendors, and um, I would say what I've seen is the best ones, well, or at least the most popular ones. I'm not sure what the best one is because I don't think I've tried everything. But the most popular ones do something of the sort of. So let's take a step back. What do you want in model observability, right? Like when engineers talk about observability, there's the general observability that is what are your number of requests, how's your latency doing, how
Right.
many errors are you dropping. This is when it comes to model survey, specifically. How is the health of your deployment and things like that. And those things are like um, more and more becoming centralized. There is a team in our
Right.
company that is actually building out of the box tools that make the monitoring and observability in that sense
Makes sense.
more and more out of the box. Before it was less out of the box. Now it's good to see that going that way. With model observability specifically in machine learning terms, we're thinking of um, how is the data stats, input data stats looking like for the last 10 minutes, an hour, and depending on the model, can I do something fast within that time frame, whatever that time frame is for your team. I think that's the golden state that everybody wants to get to. And what I've been seeing out there, based on the demos and discussions we've had with some vendors in conferences, in private discussions, and things like that, is um, they're building something similar to a Prometheus stack or something like that.
Right.
But they're also doing their secret lies in something like an analytics stack,
Hmm.
but doing that fast or in a shorter period of time than let's say an hour or half an hour update you would want on a Looker dashboard or like a Tableau dashboard. So they're looking at things like 5-minute runs, and they're running this on a Spark cluster and things like that. And if you think about it, it makes sense because you don't you can um, some of the stat functions you don't necessarily get right out of the box in a like if you self-host a Prometheus instance, for example, like you
Right.
wanna you wanna write that function that's going to be gnarly and it's going to be not so configurable, and more of the data stack, like the big data stack, quote unquote, is more amenable to the kind of metrics that you want to measure in a model. So we looked at that. Uh, we have experience self-hosting Prometheus, um, and I think not just my team, like across our company, there's a lot of teams who have experience doing that. So if you wanted to go to that route, we can. There's also some tool choices that we have to make based on the enterprise contracts. So there are different architectures we considered, and the centralized logger that you seem to be aware of is also one of the central topics of the talk that I recently gave, that I referenced in TMLS. Is basically a deployment. It's a service that can listen to, because we have standardized other parts of our stack. So we have Selden, a whole bunch of things. There is some certainty in the kind of messages and the message format that we can expect to be the outputs or the responses from the machine learning APIs. So yeah, like we were able to kind of leverage that and build a service that can listen to all of this in an asynchronous way. So the services are not waiting for this logger, and they can just specify it in their deployment script that they want to use this logger,
Hmm.
and then when they do that and their model is deployed, so whenever there is a request or a response, we can capture the inputs and outputs.
I see.
And then there is a pipeline downstream from this service that puts it in our analytics data warehouse. Um, it's still a work in progress. A lot of these things are built. A lot of these actually some use cases are fully operational on this, and they've been making reports on their models' performances, and then they're able to link their model inferences to the uh, business actions or the user actions that happen within the session, and they're able to show
Wow.
the impact of their model in. So yeah, like we have that end to end for at least one use case. We're just trying to make that more. We're in the
Generic.
phase of rolling it out as a centralized service.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay. Wow, that's
yeah,
fascinating. Congrats on that. That sounds really amazing.
yeah. Thanks.
And maybe one last question, well, which is the topic of the year, I guess. What's happening with generative AI?
Um, I can't say a lot, but I can say that we are making big strides. Uh, yeah, yeah. So we are there are we're looking at a lot of opportunities in this regard, and internally we have a lot of excitement around it, not just in terms of like what everybody might think of as excitement in the sense that, oh, we were able to use this um, popular chat uh, interface from a big company,
Yeah.
but also building products on top of something like that, and also being able to um, have our own models that we can host.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
I mean, that's something that we're thinking about. That would be the ideal case, but we're definitely. I'm trying to give you a sense of how deeply we are in, like buying into it. I'm not saying anything about whether we're doing it or not, because I don't know some of these details.
Got it.
Some of these are um, everybody's excited about it, and the leadership is uh, open to all these possibilities. That's what I want to say. So not just using these third-party vendors to build products, like they even they're ambitious enough and are actually putting energy into wanting to, even at some point in the future, have some of our own.
Wow.
Yeah, it's lucky to be in such a space, such a
Yeah,
place. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, yeah. I think we are all living in these very interesting times. Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time and helping us understand some of your work. And how you all have structured your platform team, and what are the interesting problems that you're solving, especially in the recommendation system space. Super exciting. Thank you so much. Anything else that you would like to share with our listeners, Aditya, that maybe I have not covered?
yeah. I hadn't had a chance to look at a lot of the talks, um, but yeah, like generally, like yeah, there's a lot of. I mean, I think I'm gonna assume that you've been in this industry for long enough, and we go through phases of this and that. It's yeah, like it's as I missed a few phases. I'm currently in a phase where I'm close to some of these exciting things, actually being feasible in my um, job. But I would say we don't need to be disappointed. If anyone is listening, that is disappointed, like they're in their current role, they're not able to get to this. Like there's always something new. There's always opportunities.
That's
Yeah,
that's
it's something that I've thought about a lot. Yeah.
that's such a good point. Very meaningful. Thank you so much for sharing, Aditya. I'll
Yeah.
really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And thank you so much for joining us. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Great talking to you.